So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Aloia. I'm a predoctoral student here in the University Rovira, Virgili. I'm going to do the joke. I'm Aloia, and I'm a lawyer in Terraqui, a law firm of Barcelona. And I'm going to talk about hydrogen and the energy transition. Specifically, I'm going to analyze which path hydrogen is taking in the European Union and where this path could leave us. It's a difficult question, but I will try to be really short in this presentation and clear. I'm going to answer two questions. Is the hydrogen regulatory framework considering fossil gas as a transitional energy source? What are the main issues that arise from this regulation to follow a climate-aligned path? Considering these two questions, I'm going to start to analyze the first question. To answer this question, it's important to start considering is there a role for hydrogen to achieve the decarbonization goals? Okay, according to a recent report of the IPCC from this year, hydrogen has a role for mitigation emissions in some specific sectors. Hydrogen is not a solution for every sector. We have to keep this in mind. For example, according to the IPCC, there is high confidence that hydrogen could help us to achieve a reduction of emissions from industry in some really high consuming productions. So we have to state that hydrogen could help us to achieve the decarbonization goals, but only in those applications where hydrogen is the most efficient energy for these applications. And we have to consider a right prioritization of uses of hydrogen. And we have to consider that hydrogen implies important energy losses. So the right prioritization of uses of hydrogen is the very beginning of a conceptualization of a legal framework of hydrogen. Another important point that I have to say is that assuming massive hydrogen use is in not so hard to abate sector, leave us the risk to oversizing the hydrogen infrastructure. So we have to prioritize the uses of hydrogen to not leave us to a massive infrastructure related with hydrogen and not really close to the expected demand. In the European Union, hydrogen is also considered as an energy carrier necessary to achieve the decarbonization goals. As we can see in the hydrogen strategy for a climate-neutral European Union, large-scale development of clean hydrogen at a fast pace is key for the European Union to achieve the decarbonization goals in a cost-effective way. However, as is stated in the REPowerEU plan, it's important to consider that only in hard to decarbonize industries and transport. So again, the right prioritization of uses for the use of hydrogen is essential. But we have to state, and we have to answer another question. What type of hydrogen do we need? We need fossil-based hydrogen or renewable hydrogen? That is an essential question that is in the debate today, because hydrogen is an energy carrier. That means that we need energy to produce hydrogen. And depending on what energy we use to produce hydrogen, the carbon footprint of hydrogen will be different. So we have different forms to produce hydrogen. There is a production method based on fossil fuels, what is called gray hydrogen. Also a production method using fossil fuels but incorporating a technological approach using carbon capture and storage. And also we have the renewable hydrogen produced by using electricity. None of these forms of producing hydrogen are not, all of these forms have environmental impacts, but there are concerns specifically to blue hydrogen and other concerns that specifically refers to green hydrogen or renewable hydrogen. Talking about fossil fuel hydrogen, we must say that the most important question is if this hydrogen will help us to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and also to achieve the decarbonization goals, because hydrogen, blue hydrogen, relies on some technological assumptions related with carbon capture storage, and also implies the use of fossil fuels. We have to consider that. And as regards renewable hydrogen, we have to say that also implies to use renewable energy, and this also have environmental impacts, and also raise concerns about the additionality principle, because if you use electricity to produce hydrogen, we do not consume this electricity to other uses that could be more essential and also could leave problems related to energy, to access to energy. So those are the basic problems that we face between these two production methods of hydrogen. Okay, and what hydrogen is being prompted by the European Union? The hydrogen strategy states that the priority of the European Union is to promote renewable hydrogen. But when the European Commission defines what is low carbon hydrogen that the European Union is also promoting, it incorporates the concept of blue hydrogen. So, for the European Commission, the hydrogen that will be prompted is also renewable and blue hydrogen. And since then, all the legal framework related to hydrogen incorporates this concept of low carbon hydrogen. As I have said, fossil gas is in the approved and proposed regulatory framework of hydrogen. Now I'm going to see how this approach to the low carbon hydrogen is present in all these regulatory proposal and approved regulations. So, for example, we have to consider the energy taxation directive where low carbon hydrogen and green hydrogen or renewable are taxed with the same amount. So, in this proposal, for a period of 10 years, low carbon is considered a transitional energy. So, in this case, we can see that the low carbon hydrogen is present and determines in which way the taxation will affect not only renewable but also fossil fuel in a minimum rate. Also, we have to consider the taxonomy delegated acts, because in the taxonomy delegated acts, it establishes which activities are sustainable for investments, and also has consequences on which information companies should disclose. So, according to this taxonomy delegated acts, also low carbon hydrogen infrastructure are going to be considered as sustainable, and also includes blending, which is a mixture of hydrogen and gas in the energy system. Also, we have the guidelines on state aid for climate, environmental protection, and energy. And also in these guidelines, we can see that low carbon hydrogen is also going to receive or is allowed to receive this type of aids. We have the hydrogen and decarbonized gas market proposal, which incorporates definitions of what is low carbon, but The definition refers to a further definition that is going to be defined in a delegated act in 2044. So we are promoting hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen, without a clear definition of what is low carbon hydrogen. And also we have the revision of the Trans-European regulation that implies how the hydrogen is going to be distributed and how the energy system and distribution system is going to be created that also incorporates the low carbon gases as a transitional gas. In the Repower EU, the renewable path is clear because the Commission has the ambition to promote renewable hydrogen, but does not change the legal basis that I have been exposing, because the Commission has the ambition to approve those regulations, and we don't know if the approach is going to change or not. But until now, low carbon gases are in the energy package related with hydrogen. So I have some final reflection, but I think that I have been okay. So I have to consider for my final reflections, first, that planning and regulation of hydrogen, planning and regulation of hydrogen must consider the declining role of methane to comply with climate objectives. Also, I have to say that this planification of hydrogen must consider the right uses. We cannot promote hydrogen for every uses and applications, only for those where direct electrification is not the most suitable and sustainable way. Also, we have to consider that this legal framework that affects the development of hydrogen and low carbon hydrogen parts without a definition of what is low carbon hydrogen, which is a really intriguing fact that led us to consider that this situation arises to many problems as regards the low carbon gases as a transitional way to allow fossil fuel gases in the European Union. Also, the Repower EU depends on huge quantities of imported hydrogen. And we do not have a certificate scheme of this hydrogen. So how this hydrogen is produced? Are we going to use only renewable hydrogen or also other types of hydrogen? That is an important question. Also, it implies massive investments and to really developed hydrogen technology in the European Union. And if we do not consider carefully which type of hydrogen we are developing, this could cause overestimating the future demand of hydrogen and also create locking effects and stranded assets. In any case, I have to say that this analysis, my very beginning analysis of the hydrogen legislation, paves an uncertain path towards a renewable future of hydrogen because the regulatory framework is designed to allow the continuity of fossil energy towards this concept of low carbon hydrogen. We also have concerns regarding the lack of clear definitions and methodologies to counterbalance this actual situation where renewable hydrogen seems to be the final end of the European Union. So this is my presentation. I hope having been clear.
Thank you so much, Aloia. It was very interesting and didactic, so thank you. Please now welcome Guilherme Pratti from the Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies.
So good afternoon to you all, or good morning or good evening, depending on where you're following this from. So first of all, I think it's mandatory to acknowledge the organizers. Ever since the call for contributions up until now, the organization has been impeccable. And I think that goes at first. And I'm going to apologize in advance because I don't think I can keep up with the high level of the presentation so far. So I'm already apologizing for lowering a little bit the bar. So my presentation draws up on a research I've been doing with some colleagues back in Pisa, and some of the results are coming out published now with Routledge in the Routledge Handbook of the Energy Transition, and the other ones that I'm developing now for a different article. I'm going to present the outcomes of them here. Also, as Professor Cucciolo, if I don't get the last name mistaken, showed, the climate crisis speaks legalese in many forms and in many different forms of legalese. I guess the main one would be fossil fuel subsidies. I'm not going to talk about that one specifically here. I'm going to talk about something I've been calling the lack of a shared vocabulary between international environmental law and international law of energy. And this lack of a shared vocabulary, it's after you grasp that, it's there, it's screaming at you. So, and this lack of shared vocabulary, it's precisely regard the Earth's system balance, which something Professor Cucciolo also mentioned here before. So, and by Earth system balance will be the equilibrium we're trying to maintain now. The Paris Agreement is that. You can talk about the CO2 parts per million. You can talk about the acidification of oceans. All that is contributing to this bigger balance of the Earth system. So, and that's mainly energy. So I'd like to propose here, just as a figment of a conceptual figment, so we can speak the same vocabulary. So let's call that the Earth system balance, or the energies within Earth. Let's call it the big E, the big energy with the uppercase energy here. And instrumentalized for human use energy, we use the production converted energy. The most common form we know is the electricity that we charge our phones. Let's call that the lowercase energy, or the little e. So big E for the Earth balance, the little e for the one we plug our phones. And my analysis draws from 72 up until 2015. So that's mainly the most important environmental treaties are there. And before I start talking, I would like to propose a metaphor. It's not precisely a metaphor about the Anthropocene, but I guess it would be more of us as people watching something unfolding. So Plinio il Giovane, Pliny the Younger, when the Vesuvian erupted in 79, the first century, he wrote 2 letters. The first letter, there was only the smoke, and then he narrates the epopee of his uncle that tried to go there nearby the Vesuvio to help people and ended up dying there. And the second letter is already when the Vesuvio was exploding. It was like 3 days, night, and Plinio narrates how it was to escape that. So 3 days of night, everybody trying to run away. There was ash coming down, horror. Not even Stephen King could write something as horrifying as that. And I think I can draw some parallels from what Vesuvio was doing, the description of the fact, to what we're doing now, at least what I'm doing here. Okay, so let's kickstart this. All right, so 1972, we have the Stockholm Declaration, we have the action plan of the Stockholm Declaration. And here I'd like to call your attention to 2 different things. So in the Stockholm Declaration itself, which is the document more known, we have the expressions natural resources, natural ecosystems in the plural, the Earth's capacity to produce vital and renewable resources. Let alone the vocabulary resources to talk about nature. I'm not going to go into that. But here you can see the natural ecosystems. So there you go, some underlying reference to the big E, the equilibrium of ecosystems, and the capacity to produce renewable resources. So renewable, so we have to have that balance around there. So this would be, let's call them the intangible aspects of the equilibrium of nature. Then you have in the action plan a more managerial language regarding the tangible aspects of nature that contribute to that equilibrium, you have there, for instance, the aspects of natural resources, the management of natural resources, and then the examples of soil potentialities and genetic resource and microorganisms. So this would be the tangible aspects of nature that contribute to that big systemic equilibrium. And now we're facing the 6th mass extinction, so species extinction, so that is being threatened right now. So the World Charter for Nature, 82, and then the Rio Declaration, 92, they grow up that vocabulary. They contribute greatly to advancing a vocabulary regarding what I'm calling here with you the big E. So for instance, the World Charter for Nature, 82, you have natural and ecological processes, which gives the continuity, that continuity vocabulary, the semantic field of the continuity of renewables, and so on and so on. So in the mankind quote is extracted from the preamble of the WCN. It has a very strong wording. So mankind is a part of nature, and life depends on the uninterrupted functioning of natural systems. There we go, the big E, which ensures the supply of energy and nutrients. Here in energy, given the context of the WCN, I would say this is not the supply of electricity. It's, I guess, to be the big E comment here. And then in Rio Declaration, you have, by the end of the so famous Principle 7 that draws for responsibility of states, the share but common and differentiated responsibilities, by the end you have, and this for me personally is a great wording, you have states responsible for this and that to restore the health and integrity of the Earth's ecosystem. There we go in the singular. So far it had only been in the plural. So here when you read that the Earth's ecosystem, you recognize that equilibrium of the Earth itself. And that's precisely what Paris Agreement and with the parts per million preoccupation and the acidification of ocean and the melting of the ice caps. So all that worry draws up from this ecosystem that we all share in planet Earth. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the other instruments here. I'm just putting on the most relevant ones. But from the UNFCCC afterwards, that vocabulary richness gets a little bit lost. It's still there, but it's lost, and it's mainly being substituted by environment. So for instance, if you read the Paris Agreement, you mostly read environment and climate system. Climate system, it's still there, it's still a reference to what we're calling here the big E, but nonetheless, the vocabulary richness gets a little bit lost. So going into now the little E international law, let's say the little E international instruments, we have, for instance, the European Energy Charter that, although was only a declaration of intent, of states' intent, it says energy systems, the essential importance and efficiency of energy systems is for this and that and that and that, to secure and supply the protection of, and to enhance the protection of the environment. So here you have the environment that starts, and then from then on, the environment becomes everything. Not that vocabulary richness from the international environmental law instruments. But here you have the energy systems, they have to be efficient in order to protect the environment. So although this was only a declaration of intent, this, and here we're talking about the little e, the lowercase, the instrumentalized for human use energy, let's say, this intent remains into the 1994 Energy Charter Treaty, which is binding. And the International Energy Charter kind of repeats the language of the Energy Charter Treaty. So here I'm only going to cite the Energy Charter Treaty. So here we have basically Articles 18 and 19, the most problematic ones for the transitions, and I'll gladly talk about it afterwards if that's the case. So here we have states shall strive to minimize harmful environmental impacts in a cost-effective manner, and so on and so on. So you can actually damage the environment if it costs too much to preserve it. And here again, environment. None of that vocabulary richness from the international environmental instruments is reproduced here. And then on the definition, on Article 19, on the definition of what it's the energy cycle, something very interesting happens. So during the definition of energy cycle, they say that energy cycle includes the exploration, which would be conversion, production, conversion, storage, transport, distribution, consumption of the various forms of energy. So that applies to fossil, to some renewables, whatever it is. But here you can see that there is no mention to not even the environment, this over-encompassing concept. So I consider this to be a scission a division, a split between that vocabulary richness regarding the Earth's ecosystem, the Earth balance, or as in the Rio Declaration, the Earth ecosystem in the singular, and those natural resources from Stockholm that allow for the continuity and the reproduction of the balance of the Earth. So this session, you can also see on the language that they use also in Article 18, that they say the sovereignty over energy resources. And in international environmental law, it's very common to read about the sovereignty over natural resources. So natural energy, they're split. And this is fictitious, this is a fiction, as if it was possible to produce energy, the little e energy, without the worries with let's say the big E, the balance of the Earth, as if it was an artificial production of something. So I know, so Professor Vinuales, I guess he was here in one of the first TIECs. So I'm going to paraphrase him, and then with this I'll conclude, because he was talking about sustainable development and growth. So I changed sustainable development, and I put the big E, and growth, I included the little e, and it fits perfectly. He was talking about how sustainable development was in decline in 2013, this would be. So to use a metaphorical image, the big E protection will be seen as an immigrant in the land of little e. As such, it would only have the scope of action that is consistent with the little e. If big E protection were to collide with little e considerations, the latter will likely prevail. Well, isn't it that what's happening right now at the moment? So with this, I conclude, and then just to draw up again from the metaphor of Pliny. So Pliny wrote the first letter, where it's just the smoke coming out of the volcano. The catastrophe was not yet there. The second, Pliny is right in the middle, trying to escape. So I don't know precisely in which one we are. I'm going to let that to be discussed afterwards, or to think about afterwards. But I'm going to let sink in. Pliny was a jurist, as many of us that are just watching and describing what's happening. So with this, I conclude. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Guilherme. Hey, Mònica. You are muted, so yeah, great. Okay.
Good afternoon. If I may share my screen, or you will put up the presentation?
Yes, so you can just try to share your screen. Yeah, that's great. So now please just welcome our first panelist from today. It's Mònica Figueroa. So if I pronounce it wrong, just please feel free to correct me. She's from the Institute of State and Law of the Czech Academy of Sciences. So please welcome, and thank you for being here to the 7th TIEC. The floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. And once again, good afternoon to Tarragona. I'm very pleased to be with you, at least virtually, and very honored that I can present my brief presentation. And it's basically about the role of international investments agreements in encouraging investments that are sustainable, and specifically in renewable energy.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mònica, but we cannot see your screen.
The presentation?
Yes.
Okay, I will share it again.
Yeah, now we can see it. So if you want to try and make it bigger. That's great. Thank you so much.
Yes. So I will briefly set the stage about the importance of renewable energy sources for achieving Paris Agreement goals. Then I will briefly mention and will actually follow up on Rahmi's presentation about the practice based on current international investment treaties and the inconsistent solar energy awards arising from changes to feed-in tariffs. And I will conclude with some remarks about whether the new international investment agreements enhance protection of renewables or not. And given the time limit, I have chosen two treaties. One is CETA, which is a treaty concluded between EU and Canada, and the other one is very fresh one, and I think very innovative one between UK and EU trade and cooperation agreement. Just recently, last month, the IPPC issued the 6th assessment report and the Working Group 3 on mitigation of climate change. And they concluded, or they stated with medium confidence, that investment agreements as well as agreements within the energy sector impede national mitigation efforts. And this is quite interesting in the context that if you look at the nationally determined contributions that contractual parties to the Paris Agreement need to prepare, then on the synthesis report that the UNFCCC Secretariat prepared in 2021, it derives from that actually domestic mitigation measures for renewables energy generation were the most frequently mentioned. So it's basically states are planning to achieve their climate goals, usually by expansion of renewable energy. Then the question is how actually international investment treaties can promote investor confidence, maybe can provoke like wise regulations and then more sustainable investments. And in this contribution, I'm reflecting on the protection that the international investment agreements offer to investors in renewables. The relationship between international investment agreements and climate change is complex, I would say, because we can find views that say that actually international investment agreements support energy transition. And they argue that because international investment agreements protect renewables and hold states accountable for regulatory changes. But on the other hand, we have very critical voices saying that actually international investment agreements hinder energy transition, usually pointing to the existing fossil fuels investments and which make the decarbonization difficult and potentially create the so-called regulatory chill, meaning that policymakers tend to delay urgent climate action because of the fear that they will be hit by investment claims. And I will stop here for a second regarding the first view that actually the proponents of this view, they very often refer to this renewable energy saga, which is a lot of investment disputes that were generated in the last decade and that Rahmi actually already mentioned. And especially Spain, but also Czech Republic, Italy were hit by these disputes, which related. And I think that we have quite rich case law actually on the relationship between investment protection standards and the changes in the feed-in tariff, which was, I think, in all three countries, the measure that was adopted to encourage investments in renewables. In my view, the outcome of the disputes is not that satisfactory because there were divergent approaches of the tribunals. We have a lot of dissenting opinions, and in each country, even though the factual situation was a bit different, like conceptually, there is no uniform approach and no clear answer what actually the protection is. Nevertheless, for the purposes of this contribution, what I wanted to highlight is that the legal basis for these successful investors was the fair and equitable treatment standard. And then it depended on to what extent or how the tribunals interpreted the stability commitment, whether investors can derive legitimate expectations from general law or that they needed specific promises from the host states. and also whether investors had to prove whether they did thorough due diligence under regulatory framework. When we look now at the new treaties, and I would say that we can speak about two types of innovations. One is, I call them reform provisions, and these are basically treaties that follow the recommendations of UNCTAD or OECD, and these basically reflect on trying to clarify and make more certain the standards of protection, because in the old school treaties, especially in the Energy Charter Treaty, based on which all these renewable cases were based, they contain very broad provisions or very broad wording of the fair and equitable treatment that I think enabled different types of interpretation. But now when we look at the trend, and I have selected here 3 treaties, the Canada-EU treaty, agreement between US, Canada and Mexico, which replaced NAFTA, and now the new one between EU and UK. You can see that actually there is a tendency to narrow the FET standard. There is a qualified list of events which constitute breaches. In the EU-UK, there is actually no FET. The same applies to legitimate expectations. There is tendency to disregard them or to narrow them, and to also say that changes in law, even if they have a negative economic effect on the investors, do not represent a breach of the FET. And the same applies to the investor-state dispute settlement, which was a norm in the old treaties. And here in CETA, we can see that there is a move from the arbitration, typical ad hoc arbitration courts, to the investment court system. Then also modified dispute resolution system in the new NAFTA, which actually there is no investor-state dispute settlement between Canada and US. And the same applies to the UK-EU. There is no investor-state dispute settlement. So basically, the investors wouldn't have the avenue to bring investment claims directly against the host state. So if we think about this from the perspective of the individual investor, it becomes harder, or the threshold is higher for finding the breach of the International Investment Treaty. What is more interesting to look at the innovative provisions in the new treaties. I picked CETA now, and I will compare it with the UK-EU TCA. CETA does not contain much references to climate change or to renewable energy, because we have to realize that this agreement was negotiated and drafted prior to the Paris Agreement. But even though still the treaty tries to reiterate the right of the state to regulate, to achieve legitimate policy objectives, including environment, and that's a very important component of the treaty, and also of the interpretative instrument that the states issued with this respect. The treaty also contains a commitment of the states to effectively implement multilateral environmental agreements. And interestingly, in 2018, after the Paris Agreement, the CETA Joint Committee issued a recommendation on trade, climate action, and Paris Agreement, and they specifically said that these environmental agreements mention Paris Agreement. Now, if we look to the EU-UK trade and cooperation agreement, which in my view contains the quite strong and innovative provisions as regards goals of fight against climate change, and the level of the bindingness of the obligation, we can find multiple references to climate change. It's the preamble, there is a lot of it. It actually elevates the fight against climate change at the level of rule of law, of human rights. It is considered as essential element, basically, of the economic partnership. It again recognizes the right to regulate, similarly like CETA, and now specifically it mentions the right to regulate to achieve objectives, including climate change. Also, it refers to sustainable development and the commitment to uphold high levels of protection in the areas of fight against climate change, and specifically mention the benefits of cost-efficient, clean and secure energy supplies and sustainable energy and renewable energy. Then it doesn't stand actually only with the preamble, but it is mirrored in the provisions and in some obligations. We must bear in mind that actually this is a trade agreement which contains an investment chapter, but so not all of these provisions are reflected in the investment provisions. But on the other hand, it contains quite extensive environment and climate chapter, and goes, as I said, goes beyond the cooperation obligations to something more mandatory and having legal consequences. So, for example, the fight against climate change is here specifically recognized that it represents an existential threat to humanity, and both states actually oblige to respect the Paris Agreement and have to refrain from any acts or omissions that would materially defeat the object and purpose of the Paris Agreement. And it goes even further, as I said, because climate change is considered the essential element, then any breach or breach of any obligation that relates to essential elements actually entitles one of the parties to the treaty to suspend or terminate in whole or in part the whole treaty. So this is, I consider, it's quite strong language. But on the other hand, this is between the state-to-state relationship. So it is a question how these strong commitments and also a non-regression obligation not to lower the standards that they now have, also with respect to climate change, how this affects the individual investor and encourages them to actually invest in sustainable. So this is the question, and I know that I'm mindful of the time, so I will end here, and I will be happy for any questions or comments.
Thank you so much for such a great contribution, Mònica, and to the rest of the panelists and to Dr. Andrews Cochulo for sharing with us such an exciting research. Andrews, if you could join us back, just in case there's any question. Now, please, to all the ones of you that are here and the ones that are online, if you have any question, please raise your hand. We will share the mic with you. Or if someone online has a question, just raise the hands or just use the chat and share the questions, and we will be happy to answer them. Great.
Hello, my name is Ron Janjua, and I'm affiliated with the University of Groningen, so I think someone else here is from there as well. And thank you very much for very thought-provoking presentations. As a previous political economist, a lawyer in international relations, and now studying cultural geography, my concern about this idea of a green energy transition, which is very much needed, I mean, we're at a tipping point now that we need to do something about this, is the impact on the Global South. The Global South has always been the ones that bear the biggest burden when it comes to climate change, deforestation, violence, extraction. And as we transition into this new green energy approach, extraction is going to increase, not decrease. We're going to be looking at rare earth minerals, more lithium, more copper, more gold. All of these things are required for the circuitry and for windmills, bauxite. All of these things are going to increase, and the primary modality for extracting these things is strip mining. And if we end up in a situation where we prioritize this this approach that we need to save humanity entirely and then load that burden back on the global south again, which is primarily where these minerals are extracted from, Africa, South America, and in parts of Asia, where these people don't have a political voice and don't have the capacity to push back, then we're going to end up destroying the very environments that actually help the earth breathe. And so we have to be very, very careful, in at least from my perspective, on protecting these communities and giving them some sort of democratic voice, because there's already a democratic deficit there. And if we've got organizations like the EU and the EU and all these trade agreements sort of, formed by intellectuals and legal representatives and people in very, very high positions in society, making these decisions for the community and saying we want to save the environment while we destroy the very environment that is supposed to be protected, then we're going to end up causing more problems than we're going to solve. So I just invite comments from any of you, because all of your presentations seem to touch on, the law and, the economy, etc.
Well, I think that this is a very hard point, and it is clear that even the energy transition that we are facing, which is supposed to be sustainable, has some losers, and still the same losers. But we need that. So here the point where there is no tricky. At least the tricky solution is not sustainable development. I think that sustainable development was tricky for international treaties to stay around the table and convene a common solution, but a theoretical one. Now maybe because of the I was speaking about the price of renewables and so on, but there is still a problem about the raw materials for that. So we cannot do the energy transition that we want without some materials. Therefore, we need to push on circular economy, even if I fear the circular economy could be other apparatus that may hinder the problem, but we have to go through this path, and we cannot achieve any energy transition without the occupation of this, which is also a problem. Actually, here we are experiencing a lot of popular opposition and confrontation about that. Now, yeah.
And don't want to invest in the project. And if we don't find some sort of cooperative, sustainable coexistence way of doing these things, we're only going to polarize the earth. We're not going to achieve our ends.
So maybe the answer could be the growth, but there is a problem. Democratic support about that. I mean that maybe most of us think that the growth is the right solution, but are government in their programs, legitimate government, the growth in their program, political program? So it's possible to achieve that without this democratic mandate. Yeah, this is a problem, and a hard one, I think.
If I still can, I'd like 30 seconds of comment, because that's actually one of the my biggest worries regarding the transition. If you read, it's not even to read closely because it's just there. On the EU Green Deal, there is this big worrisome wording about the green diplomacy, and the EU says, "Oh, we're going to help other countries to do the transition." So if you think about the global South, that on the wake of decolonization just recently industrialized, let's say it industrialized to the wrong energy matrix, because some countries are still paying their debts, and now they're going to get more funding to do this second industrialization, let's put it that way. So this is one part of what you're mentioning, which would be the debt, because this country is just recently industrialized, and now they're going to have to change the energy matrix. And the other one is we're already seeing that. What the Bolsonaro government is doing in Brazil, in all national biomes. But then when it comes to the Amazon, it's heartbreaking. This is the Portuguese colonization again, but done by Brazilian and big capitals. So now, for instance, there was this big thing of Elon Musk that went to the Amazon because he's trying to take internet into the schools. Please. And Amazon has a huge amount of lithium also. So there you go. There's the preoccupation is there. But one way to try to compensate this juggling of plates that are about to fall would also the EU, at least in the European level, which is the one I know a little. The EU has also some worries about the grassroots movement, and they're trying to give voice to people to talk on the Green Deal and the Next Generation EU, and so on and so on. So I guess if people start chipping in their opinions and their worries about what's going to happen or what's already happening in the global South, that might maybe put a break in it, might slow it down. I don't know if it can be stopped, but nonetheless, it should be put it out there.
If I might, just a small comment, and I think yes, that's totally correct, and that's one of the hot topics of every conference that I've been joining recently, about the indigenous rights and the mineral issue that you've mentioned, and also in addition to that, the decommissioning part. So that's also unknown. So after 20 years, wind turbines, solar panels, what will happen with those? That's another discussion point. And I think I'm not really expert on that, but I think we will hear more about that in this conference. The energy justice literature is trying to deal with that particular issue. So I think it's still in its infancy. People are really trying to find ways to resolve that problem. I totally agree that's a huge problem, and I'm afraid we don't know the answer yet, but people are working on it. Energy justice literature scholars, they are working hard on it, and I guess they will come up with a solution soon, hopefully.
Mònica, there's something you want to build on what's been discussed here in this table?
No, I would just mention from the perspective of the just international investment law is obviously also developing countries are developing and Africa is, I think, great in that, is developing their own conducts on sustainable development and trying to change the metrics, and I think there will be a way also for research and for further discussion on the responsibilization of the investments from the capital exporting countries. But I guess this doesn't clearly follow about the concern that was expressed.
Thank you so much. Is there any other question here? Do you want to raise? Yep.
So for your answers to the question of the gentleman there, so I understand that the European Union doesn't have a joint strategy about the obtaining of the resources, nor a strategy to assert a sustainable flux of resources to build this Green Deal and the solar energy and all the technology that has to be obtained to assert this Green Deal. I am correct? there's no nor a strategy nor a effort or a legal effort in this matter?
I think there is the investment screening method in the European Union. So they are screening of both the incoming and outgoing investments. So where the investors are going, what they are doing in other countries. There is such a mechanism. I'm not. I don't know the very details of it, but there are, I guess, certain mechanisms also under the sustainability topic. There are certain mechanisms in place, but are they enough to resolve that issue? That's the problem. Yeah, I think that there are certain mechanisms to oversee these, to not to harm other people in other countries. There are mechanisms, but are they reliable? Are they applicable? That's another question.
It's not that it does not have the overarching political intent that the Green Deal is with all its tentacles, like the farm to fork strategy, for instance, and the new industry policy, for instance. These things are there. They are, and the European Green Deal language itself really wants to reach out. At least that's what you can get it from. That it wants to work with partners. Also because, again, the reality I know a little bit better is the Brazilian one. So, for instance, Brazil, it's an exporting country, exports commodities. A lot of those commodities go to China, and a part of them come to Europe. Europe is a gigantic market. So no country wants to lose that market. And in the EU Green Deal, you can read that, well, if you don't abide by these rules, you're going to lose the market. We're not going to buy it from you. So, for instance, now there is some problem with the buying meat from Brazil because originated from illegal logging in the Amazon, for instance. So this is the, let's say, the easy cases. The hard cases are the ones we're going to see a little ever more, I guess, when it comes to raw materials. And regarding raw materials, at least to the extent of my research, it's still a shady aspect in the EU Green Deal. That would be my 2 cents.
About that, I would like to add some political sensitive element. I think that the European strategy through plans, communication, and so on are plenty of idea about the regulatory global power, the global regulatory power of Europe. But there is some practical contradiction. So, for instance, a few days ago, Frans Timmermans said, while Europe has complicated relations with countries like Egypt and Turkey, these countries are going to be producing renewable energy in quantities way beyond their own needs. So this is like, okay, we have a pipeline with Russia, which now is not good, but we can have a pipeline for hydrogen from Turkey and Egypt. And well, Mario Draghi say a couple of months ago that Erdogan is a satrap. But okay, green energy is green. You can understand the point, right? And this is the same with renewable hydrogen plants in Africa and so on, which will be a new form of colonization. A sustainable one? I don't know. 1 kilogram of hydrogen is 17 liters of water. In Africa. Okay.
I do have a question, a bit in line with yours, actually. Now that you've been thinking about the exploitation, the ones that are always being the forgotten ones, I cannot stop thinking about the idea of every time that we think about these ones, they are always human, but what happens with the non-human, either in the global north, the global south, everywhere? It's just that with this energy transition, I feel that we are trying to do a change towards renewable energy sources in a matter of time that maybe it's not that much, and we are forgetting others along the way. So I'm just thinking, like, how do you think that it will affect biodiversity, this push toward renewables and making these big farms of solar panels and so on?
So can I guess you're going to be tired of my voice in the next few minutes. So no, actually the results I presented, they're from the article that's entitled Advancing Legal and Practical Recognition with a Non-Human Right to Energy. So the impacts are already there. We're already having the 6 mass extinction of species. But this big E thing and the non-human right to energy of the article is the big E, let's put it that way. So the energy crisis and all the other crises embedded and constitutive of it, they should raise also big E energy concerns. Like one example, again, from reality I know better, Brazil has a very clean energy matrix. 63% of the energy produced in Brazil comes from hydropower plants. These hydropower plants, they're almost all of them, like 70% around of it, is located in the south of Brazil. So there is this big phenomenon, the non-human phenomenon that happens, that's called the flying rivers. It's a very nice name to a scientific phenomenon that happens, which is basically the wind comes in from the ocean, goes into the Amazon, it rains there. The huge amount of trees pump billions of tons of water into the air. And again, the air that's coming pushes into the Andes, into the mountains. And in the mountains, this massive amount of water vapor takes a turn and goes to the south of Brazil, where it rains and where you have the hydropower plants. Now with the illegal logging, the destruction of the Amazon, last year Brazil had the worst drought in 90 years. And then now Brazil started doing fossil fuel-based energy in a country that does not need it. So there you go. That's one catastrophe. And that's an energetic one, because if you don't have rain in Brazil, you cannot produce hydroelectric power. And can you imagine a country as big as Brazil depending on fossil fuels to turn on the lights? That's insane. So the non-human should actually be a big worry about it. And then it connects to the 2 questions of raw materials and so on. So yeah, that should be one of the main concerns.
Thank you so much for your answer.
That maybe to solve this situation, the European Union and also Spain relies on environmental assessment and other type of administrative procedures that in some cases does not work to protect nature. And it's really concerning the new Repower plan in this aspect, because it considers that we have to put zones where renewables have to be in place, and that should be considered carefully, because it depends on how we design these zones. It will affect a lot how biodiversity especially will be protected, because nowadays the procedurals related with the protection of Natura 2000 does not work really well. So if we make the procedures even more short and with less participation, it will be difficult to say that this will be a better situation for biodiversity.
Thank you so much, Aloia.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for very, very insightful presentations. My name is Asma Khadem from Leiden University. Sort of in keeping with this comment about rights of nature, really is what we're talking about here. I actually have a question for Dr. Cucciolo. So my area of research is, one of them is constitutional rights right to a healthy environment, which also has been extended to rights of nature. And you made a comment about sovereignty going unchallenged and sovereignty potentially being a barrier to the energy transition. And in my research, I've seen some examples where sovereignty is also applied to protect natural resources and the environment through these constitutional rights provisions. So for example, in Chile and Costa Rica with gold mining, you know, those constitutional rights provisions have been operationalized to actually put a stop to certain environmentally destructive activity. So I guess I'm curious as to your thoughts that can sovereignty also be a force for you know, ensuring a sustainable energy transition? And I'm also curious to hear what the rest of the panelists think. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Well, I fully understand the your position and the matter. Actually, my reflection starts about a political movement here in generally in Europe, in Spain, in Catalonia. Here, there is a movement for energy sovereignty. So I fully understand the idea, but maybe we should talk about energy resiliency, energy independence, because the idea of energy sovereignty is that there is a sovereign decision about I can exploit energy resources whatever I want. But it's not possible because of planetary boundaries, tipping point, and so on and so on. So the proper principle, the proper principle of sovereignty over energy resources was a principle of international law from protect the process of decolonization, but it was used by the international law system to foster the process of economic globalization, financialization, and so on. Therefore, maybe the interpretation of the principle may change depending of the area. It sounds to me quite controversial that in Europe, where we have no raw materials, fossil fuels, and even if we have fossil fuels, the exploitation is not possible. And even the exploitation of renewable energy depends on raw materials that we don't have. So we can do whatever we want. I think that we need this to secure this corridor for human and non-human forms of life, and to build instruments for resistance. Rights of nature now are instruments of resistance. We need this kind of instruments. Are the only one? Maybe not. We can think about form of stewardship, or I'm really keen with legal innovation and creativity, because this is a form of resistance. Maybe we need some kind of new thinking, no? Constitutional, administrative. I'm from administrative law, which is a very traditional legal scholarship, but still something is changing.
Does someone else want to say something? Is there any other question here? No. Okay, then thank you so much to all of you for coming. I want to personally, again, from the organizing committee, thank you for giving me a heartfelt thank you for your presentations, for your contributions, for your participation. So thank you so much. And please join us now at the second floor, that there's a coffee break there. So if you go there, you can just have some coffee and some food. So please feel free to go there, and we can meet back here in 30 minutes at 17:45 or so on. Thank you so much.